Hey everyone and welcome back. Today we're along CSX tracks on the former Baltimore and Ohio line from Cincinnati to Lima. We'll start off in Glendale, take a look around at one of the best Railfan sites in the area, then we'll head north to Dayton, check out the Great Miami River Railroad Bridge. We'll also learn a little bit about the Union Station that used to be in town. Lastly, we head to Sidney and take a look at the Big 4 concrete bridge. I've always wanted to catch a train over it. Maybe we'll get lucky today. Well, let's get right to the action in Glendale. It didn't seem promising though, with all red signals staring me down and a high railer getting on the number 2 track and heading off into the distance. But hey, let's see what happens. I couldn't be sure, but I think that high railer was on its way to pick someone up from Q351. That train starts at Barr Yard in Chicago, makes its way south, stopping to work the yard in Garrett, Indiana, which is north of Fort Wayne, before turning south to Deshler and finishing up at the Queensgate Yard in Cincinnati. Typically, this line is mostly northbound traffic. It's part of a directional running agreement with Norfolk Southern. So it was unusual to see the southbound Q351 heading toward us.
Road crew express road van, CSX Q35104, over. Yeah, I'm here in Glendale. Is that the right location for you? Over. No, sir, you're too far north. You need to go to Keys Run, over. Alrighty, thanks. Bye. Engineering needs to put out a slow order between the PE 19.4, 19.5, 10 miles an hour. And I know that's just before the signal there. Number one, if I put it in the system, PTC, can you comply with that? Or will they call it? Or do you need to call me back there?
Most southbound traffic uses the nearby Norfolk Southern route, made up of its Newcastle and Dayton districts. The directional running is between Winton Place, which is north of the Queensgate and Guest Street yards, and Butler Street, which is in Hamilton. Due to the track layout in Hamilton, though, some traffic must come down the B&O line. CSX's Indianapolis subdivision joins the Cincinnati terminal sub in Hamilton at the city's former station. That junction, though, is south of Butler Street and requires eastbound trains coming off the Indianapolis sub to head south against the directional running. There are also several locals which serve the line and must run against the directional running on return. Dispatchers will also occasionally route other southbound traffic through Glendale if the NS line is backed up, which seems to be happening more and more based on the number of stopped trains I see. Also, the tri-weekly Amtrak Cardinal travels through Glendale on its way to Chicago Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and the eastbound to New York heads south through here Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Both are very early in the morning, though.
I don't know what it would do. I would think that it wouldn't cause anything, but I tell you what, I have to hold you for a funeral progression, so I'll bring your train to a controlled stop. Meet me on the 66. Road crew express road van to CSX Q35104, over. 351, go ahead, over. Yeah, do you still need a ride, over?
Let's take a quick look around and see what Glendale has to offer. It has signals in both directions, although you will have to walk a little bit to see the southbound ones on the back of this cantilever. There's plenty of parking and some benches set up to enjoy the passing trains. This is a morning or early afternoon spot for photography. The sun will shine nicely on the side of trains from the east. The former Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad Depot was built in 1880. It's kept up nicely by the Glendale Heritage Preservation. A museum is inside the depot, which was built to replace the original 1854 wooden structure, which was destroyed by a fire. The village of Glendale and volunteers spent tens of thousands of dollars and thousands of man-hours to restore the depot. It opened as the Glendale Heritage Preservation Museum in May of 1997. Here comes another train, though. I can't believe it. It's another southbound, this time Q561.
243, south on 2, clear, turn road, 561 out.
This train starts in Selkirk, New York, and finishes up at the Queensgate Yard in Cincinnati, but not before working several other yards along the way. The Baltimore Ohio Lima line was acquired when the B&O purchased and subsequently merged the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad in 1917. Passes through several manufacturing centers and remains one of the busiest lines into the Cincinnati area. It heads north to Toledo and Detroit. It also offers access to eastern cities with a turn at Sidney and again at Deschler. The line is split in two sections. From Hamilton south as part of the Cincinnati Terminal, north of Hamilton as part of the Toledo subdivision of the Louisville Division. You probably noticed we haven't heard a horn from either train though. That's because the village of Glendale is now a quiet zone. The work toward this began in 2017. The village worked closely with the Ohio Rail Development Commission as well as CSX to establish the 11th quiet zone in Ohio and the second one in Hamilton County. A quiet zone is a designated area where trains are not permitted to routinely sound their horns while passing rail crossings. There are two grade crossings here, one at Sharon Avenue and then south of here at Oak Avenue. Engineers are only allowed to sound their horns under certain circumstances, including when passing another train or in the event of a possible emergency, say someone's on the tracks or maybe a little too close. There are strict safety requirements in order to establish a quiet zone. The village installed quad gates at each of its intersections. Quad gates have twice the gates of a standard crossing, blocking traffic on both sides of the road for the passing train. There are also magnetic sensors installed along the rails at each crossing. These sensors notify an engineer of an oncoming train as well as the computer-operated gates that an obstruction may be present on the track. The fencing required by CSX changed the configuration of the parking lot and closed the pedestrian crossing near the Depot Museum. Village officials say while the railroad is integral to the history of Glendale, the horns in recent years have become louder and more frequent than in the past. The quiet zone was paid for with private donations, federal and state funding, and by CSX. While we wait for one more train, let's talk food. Well, food and views, if you will. Next to the tracks is Cock and Bull English Pub. It has a second-story outdoor seating area that's covered, so you can enjoy a nice meal and still see the trains passing by from an elevated position. While I was here, some rail fans went to grab a bite to eat. There is a defect detector about 2 miles south of here in Woodlawn, so if you have a scanner, you can get a heads up on approaching northbound trains.
Detector, milepost 13.5, track main 2, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Total axles 424. Detector out.
You can usually pick up another defect detector about 12 miles from here north of Hamilton at New River Junction. Speaking of, we've got a clear signal for our first northbound, and I hear the defect detector south of here.
CSX detector, milepost 13.5, track main 2, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Total axles 544. Detector out.
As we watch the engine come toward us, notice all those bugs flying around. Those are cicadas, and this brood only comes out every 17 years. When they do, they really come out. They fly everywhere, they bump into you, and they grasp onto you. Plus, that constant background noise you hear, well, that's their mating call. In just a few weeks, though, they'll all be gone and not seen for another 17 years. Also, pay attention to our next stops. The cicadas are very climate dependent and only go so far north. Well, back to the train. I've been waiting on a northbound, and this was it. This is Q556, a daily that starts in Queensgate Yard and makes its way to Collinwood Yard in Cleveland. Along the way, it stops to work New River, Ohio, which is north of Columbus. We can see those quad gates in action in the corner of your screen. One thing I don't see, though, are gates for the pedestrian crossing. I thought those were required as part of the quiet zone, too. You can see how nice the parking lot is. You can also see where the old lot butted up next to those tracks, and how the fence keeps people several feet back. Glendale really is a great spot. There's plenty of action, lots of nearby parking. There's a gas station that has an ice cream shop inside if you want to get something sweet on a hot day. The town really has embraced the Railfan. And if you're from out of town, you'll likely run into at least one other Railfan who can tell you another spot to check out while you're visiting. Once it clears, my next move was deciding where I wanted to catch it again. Not knowing it was Q556 at the time, I hoped it was staying on the B&O line. I went to Dayton and planned on setting up on the CSX Great Miami River Bridge. I worked in Dayton for a few years and always thought this was a pretty scene. I checked the signal to the west of the bridge and saw a medium clear at MC Cabin. I was in luck. I didn't know how much time I had though, so I only set up 2 cameras and then took off with the drone. It wasn't more than a few minutes until I heard a horn and knew the train was moments away. The Great Miami River Bridge is about 675 feet long, with its longest span about 225 feet. We'll follow it a bit as it travels on the elevated section through downtown. You can see the elevated section used to house several more tracks. The only other remaining track as part of Norfolk Southern's Dayton district, which goes on to Springfield and then Columbus. The tracks were raised due to increasing traffic and congestion in the early 1900s. There used to be a Union Station here, but sadly it's been torn down long ago. Built in 1900, it was called Tower Depot because of its 7-story clock tower. In the first 30 years of operation, the station hosted as many as 66 passenger trains a day. In 1931, the station opened an elevated platform to alleviate the congestion between trains, streetcars, and automobiles. Some famous people who stopped by the station include child actress Shirley Temple in 1944, President Harry Truman in 1948, and President Ronald Reagan in 1983, both of which making campaign stops in the Gem City. I really do hate seeing grand buildings like this destroyed. As it finishes up crossing the Great Miami River, I think I'll try to catch it one more time. So I head to one of my favorite spots, Sidney, Ohio. Sidney is the junction between the north-south Toledo sub and the east-west Indianapolis line. The east-west line used to be called the B line, which was former New York Central track that ran between Berea, outside of Cleveland, and St. Louis. When Norfolk Southern and CSX divided Conrail, the B line went to CSX. The section of the Indy line consists of two subdivisions, the Indy sub to the west and the Mount Victory sub to the east. The biggest draw here is the Big Four Bridge, which carries traffic over the valley and the Great Miami River. The massive concrete structure was built as a relocation project after the devastating flood of 1913 wiped out the downtown bridge. The bridge has a date cast into a pier showing a 1923 construction date, but didn't actually open until 1924. A historical plaque notes 5 men died during the building of the bridge, one of which is believed to be buried in the pier behind the plaque. The bridge is structurally sound, but you can see the surface concrete is cracked and many chunks have fallen. No word what it will take for the bridge to be rehabbed. As we look around, we see the old Big Four passenger depot just west of the bridge. Built in 1923, it's one of the last depots still standing on the line, but who knows for how much longer. It's in bad shape now, and there was a push to save it at one time, but I'm not sure if that's still in the works. South of here is another concrete arch bridge, though not nearly as big and grand, it is still impressive. This bridge carries the Lima line over the Great Miami River. Now let's look at the track layout. The east-west line is carried over the north-south tracks. CSX built a connection track in 1997, which allows northbound trains to turn east toward Marion, Ohio, and westbound trains to turn south toward Cincinnati. It is possible for other combinations, but because of crossover locations, I would imagine it would be avoided if at all possible. The signals in the area are very unique. They're in a triangle shape and sometimes called tri-lights. They were introduced about a century ago. Hopefully CSX doesn't see a need to replace them anytime soon, as I enjoy them. This is approach-lit territory, so the dark-lit signals were not good news. While I was at the smaller concrete bridge, I sent my drone to see if there was any good news for the northbound train I had been following. Sadly, there wasn't. All red. I did find it interesting. The red signals were in the top positions on the top and bottom signal heads. It looks like the middle can display red, yellow, green, and restricting. The signal is ahead of the connection track that turns to the east, but it's the only one here, so I assume it also governs the number 2 track just ahead of it. Back to the tri-lights. After doing some more exploring, I sent my drone to the westbound signals to check one last time before leaving. Bingo! We're in luck. We have a red over flashing yellow. I can also see the switches line to turn the train south towards Cincinnati. Since this was a former Conrail line, I'm going to assume that's a medium approach. Please let me know if I'm wrong. I couldn't find anything specific to these signals. The other signals are red over red. I wonder if it's just lit up because something is in the block and not on the track, or if the train is making a diverging move somewhere east of here. If it were just making a diverging move, though, wouldn't the eastbound signal light up red too? Well, I'm just thinking out loud. Please share any knowledge you have about these signals and the way they light up. I'm very curious. Well, after waiting more than an hour, a fellow Railfan who showed up noted that something was finally coming. I hit record on my cameras, but there's not much of a different view between them, but it was the best I could do, and then I send my drone. We're looking at Q217, as it heads from Greenwich Yard in Philadelphia to Osborne Yard in Louisville with all those auto racks. This daily also works Twin Oaks in Pennsylvania and Cumberland Yard in Maryland. It runs through Marion, Ohio.
217 southbound, medium clear, Sidney Junction.
He's going down, so he's probably going down.
I will say, it is impressive to finally see a train over this bridge. It's getting late and I still have a 90-minute drive back to Cincinnati ahead of me. I'm guessing that northbound I had been following got stuck waiting for 2 southbounds I saw from I-75 between Tip City and the Piqua area.
CSX 499 south, medium approach. Northern Piqua Main 143.
Or who knows, maybe it had a crew change in Vandalia or something. Either way, this was a really fun day.
It's coming up here shortly.
I've got 2 other trips in the works. I went to Knoxville, Tennessee to get a look at Norfolk Southern's Severe Yard. I'm also trying to put together a video on Seymour, Indiana and the CSX and Louisville, Indiana intersection. I'm still hoping to follow a train from Louisville to Cincinnati or vice versa. So feel free to comment if you know a good time on the weekend to make that happen. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this trip and learning a little bit about the B&O Lima line. As always, please let me know where you like to railfan and where you think I should stop next. Until our next trip, have a great day.